All right, all right, all right. The Oscars have just taken place. Did you see it? Do you see who won?
I saw some of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just one of those things that comes and goes. But we're here to talk about Aristotle, not Timothy, the next Johnny Depp. So, welcome back, folks. Welcome back. You are joined by Luca Teller and Alex Connor McLean yet again. The bros by the campfire here to talk about the GOAT, Aristotle, arguably's metaphysics. So, yeah, we were saying some pretty inappropriate stuff just before, so I won't use that language. But clothes are back on, mouths are soaped out, and so yeah, we're pretty hyped to get into this. It's been a privilege so far in terms of the streams of thought and sentiment we've traversed. I would say it's kind of gone to our credit exactly how I thought it would go. So I mean that in a positive way. When I was envisioning doing this series with you, Alex, and doing it on this book and being involved with it, I had a fantasy of how it would go, and it's kind of aligned with that pretty truly so far. I knew that the side quest would become the main quest, and the main quest would get lost in the mix, and the main quest would be like this rugged through line that we try to keep returning back to and keep finding. But it's like that knot that only stays looking like a knot, as long as you hold it there. Otherwise, it just dribbles away from you. So without getting too caught up with senseless analogies, yeah, welcome back. How are you feeling, Alex? We're here. We're alive. Anything to say?
We are alive. Aristotle is alive. Philosophy is a lie. With our aliveness bursting forth into our psychic excess, I'm looking forward to once again pushing the boats out, the boats of Aristotle's metaphysics, and getting into, continuing our journey here. I think for me, to be honest, no fantasy of mine could have possibly shown me how this was to go and how the transformative spirit was to deal its cards to us. There's a way in which there's a transformation taking place, which you can't predict, and you, like, by definition, because of your status before the transformation, couldn't see exactly how it goes. So there's a sense like I'm like, following and tracking, and this all makes sense. But I have also been just inherently surprised by what it is affording and like what this series is doing for me personally. And that's just a real privilege. Yeah.
I don't share your surprise, but okay, without further ado, would you like to get into the recap of last episode, sir?
It is owing to the wonder that men both now and at first began to philosophize. That's philosophy begins in wonder that Aristotle starts off with. And in the book that we covered, in book Beta, Aristotle lays out a number of puzzles and challenges and paradoxes that almost gets the wonder going in the first place in philosophy. If it was all a set of straightforward paths and courses that our minds could take, then it wouldn't be as wondrous and it wouldn't be as mysterious and alluring. But what Aristotle is doing is showing all of the different seemingly irresolvable paradoxes that defines the scope of metaphysics. And so it's a very interesting literary approach, and it's reminiscent of Einstein's quote about if he had an hour to solve a problem, he'd spend 55 minutes first diagnosing the issue and 5 minutes solving the issue. And that's the context that we're in for book Beta and the metaphysics. And we actually begun last episode with a few side quests. It took us some time before we came to actually talk about the subject matter, the metaphysics. We made a number of side quests, like what you'd said just before we started calling, like make the side the main. That is like the on the wayness of life is one of its greatest gifts. When you have a direction that you're taking, like we have this book, the Metaphysics, and we're going through it chapter by chapter. But it is these ventures that we make that are connecting, like the associations that come up. And when we follow that thread and then weave it back into our through line, that's one of the greatest places to be in your philosophy and in your journey of life, I feel. I have a story where one time I was going out to the beach with friends that were traveling New Zealand, and there was a strawberry, pick your own strawberry field, and we just pulled it and stopped just because we saw the sign. And that venture of going out and picking strawberries and having fun and taking photos and then going out to the beach, like, made the whole trip and just brought it to such a place where it was like, wow, things were just falling into place for us. Like it really worked. I think that's the spirit they want to treat the side quest. That is intentionally part of it, even though it is necessarily different from our intention at the outset. So not to go too deep into the side quests, but to name them, like understanding the hourglass of identity in philosophy. And I think that is quite relevant because identity has been, like, that is the philosophical moment in some ways for a lot of politics and philosophy and academia today, is identity. What is it? What rights should it give us? What identity should we have? And I think we are in this position of existential Dasein, and we're wondering what to call that. Dasein being like place in the world and situatedness. We're in a certain situation in the 21st century with this history of knowledge, and unsure of where to place ourselves and where to place our essences in that history. So identity has become like a kind of buzzword in the last 10 years and fizzled out a little bit today. But I think the hourglass of identity helps to show and bring in relations to your own lack and your own temporality that are really significant. Because at the end of the day, your lack and temporality is going to become the critical thing about your identity in that you die. And so being able to have that already incorporated into your corporeal selves as you go through life living just gives you such balance and alignment, and also gives you the right relation to things in your life. You're not holding on to ornaments around you too tightly. You're not holding on to status and identity, but you can actually let them go a little bit because you realize that in the final analysis, they are going to be put down. There were the themes of carrying your ashes, right relation to the ornaments that we wear and the clothes we put on. And those concepts aren't reducible to each other. Those side quests aren't reducible to each other, but they do have clustered themes, I feel. There was also an interesting point where we talked about how, and almost at the root of that is doing shadow work doesn't guarantee that you're doing shadow work, that there's actually intrinsic qualities of progressing and learning and growing through right relation to death and identity, etc., that someone like Jung can't just guarantee that you get that. And we talked about how rather Jung is a tool or a schema that you should use to find yourself, but it always comes back to you. You don't find yourself exactly in Jung's writings, but it's through his writings and teachings that you can help land on that for yourself. So that's a little bit of a snapshot of where we were going at the start of the episode. Book Beta itself, it's the set of requirements that for Aristotle one must resolve in giving a comprehensive account of metaphysics. And so it's still not the answers that Aristotle has in the Metaphysics, but it is deepening questions and deepening contradictions about reality and about things like essence and existence, or plurality versus unity, principle versus like real and material. A lot of dichotomies that he's thinking through and trying to unpick. And it seems like there's about 3 or 4 different puzzles per each like complex of idea that Aristotle's trying to answer. And I think there was an inspiration from, because that is Aristotle's approach here, we also wanted to make that our approach for the last episode, was not to come to answers ourselves, but to deepen our own questions in our search of understanding. And I think doing that in conversation is a great way to deepen that contradiction and deepen the questions you're asking. There's a dialectical nature to Aristotle's puzzles of him setting up a thesis, antithesis, and then throughout the rest of the metaphysics coming to sort of resolve that. And I think in the conversation, in the form of conversation itself, we are in that dialectical way of the dialectical symphony of our perspectives is hashing apart these different poles and defining them through our discussion of it. We did finally get to one of the puzzles in the episode. We discussed the second puzzle, and it was we likened it a little bit to what Immanuel Kant does much later when he psychologizes philosophy. And it was really for Aristotle, the question of the principles that we operate from. What is the status of logic, and what is the status of the things that logic seeks to describe? And like these principles that he has, how significant are they? And we kind of pointed out that it is very much like it's just philosophy that is uniquely placed to question its assumptions and to examine the logic that it's created. So there's almost like a winking or an inside joke, because it's only philosophy by its own nature that is constituted to examine its own constructions like logic. So it incites its own induction, as you put it, which was really well put. And I think from there we had some great riffs come of it. We talked about getting to these ultimate limits of philosophy and of nature and of spirit and of subject, and finding that when we get to these absolutes where we can't think beyond them in some sense, that it is freedom that springs forth, or it is the good, which is this overwhelming sort of feeling that bounds forth from those limits, which is, that's the kind of thing that I couldn't have predicted about this series, And we sort of ended with this musings on how it feels like we're almost, kids in a candy store, and that there is a kind of desire innate in this where, it's hard to pin down exactly what we're after. But if you think about it, and the way I kind of see it is almost if the candy is contradiction, and we know that the deeper the contradiction we acquire, the deeper we come to know our Dasein and our being in the world, the more that affords a deepening of self and a deepening of contrast in the relations we have to things in this world. And so philosophy begins in wonder, and at the end, when philosophic thought has done its best, the wonder remains. To finish on a quote from Alfred North Whitehead.
Beautifully recounted, sir. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think the spirit, personified, that's kind of sitting on that. You mentioned like a mantle and like a ladle, something like that. That's the cauldron's heart. You were giving me all these alchemy terms that I wasn't familiar with, which was great for me, because then I later went to search all of that up and it all made sense. Sitting on just above the fireplace, above the burning cauldron, is the term at the beginning, first few episodes. It might have been philosophy as physiology, which really felt like was alive in the spirit of our discussion and discourse in general as well. We then shifted to, I would say, magic, and we called it tentatively philosophy as alchemy. Last time, I just happened to say philosophy as the workings and the dealings of someone being healthily susceptible, like as the as the primer of philosophy, the preconditions, because the discussions started to surround the idea of the logic versus substance, right? Is the name of the game, to study the conditions of reality, or the preconditions that give birth to reality. And in spirit of that, the spirit, the healthy or unhealthy unhappy consciousness, as Hegel would say, that's doing the thinking, that's doing the cognizing. Funnily enough, I've been thinking just about metaphysics qua metaphysics. And it's funny, like there's a 15 minutes of fame and very modern hyper consumer culture element to the idea of metaphysics in my mind now. It's growing like a weird limb to it, I would say, because metaphysics seduces you into believing in its possibility. It's like the only sub-science that's perennially incipient. You're like, okay, this new thing just came about. There's this new cultural big bang. Okay, what does that mean for the nothing? What does that mean for the cognizer? What does that mean for perception itself? What does that mean? How does the interplay of those factors weave into the underlying nature of reality? So it's like we're just about to solve it. We're just about to solve it, and you never do, but you also do. Like we've been on a wondrous journey for the last few millennia, but also we've gotten further than where we started. But then also the people that started us and got us the furthest are happy that we're like not even close. So yeah, not only do we start at a place of wonder, I just wanted to acknowledge that we also, the midpoint, the side quest, the end point, everything is wonder vis-a-vis metaphysics. It's not just the beginning place. The other thing I was thinking is, in our first episode, I swear, guys, if you're watching, we'll get into this episode soon and this video and what we're here to talk about. But just you've spurred too much when you said that recap. It was too beautiful. In the first episode we did, on screen now, if you want to see, but we said that if we do a good job, then Aristotle will be present watching us. In the last 2 or 3 episodes, we've gotten so existential and 18th and 19th century romantic that I feel like if we do a good job, Aristotle's watching us, but Kierkegaard's watching him and stewarding him and making sure he does a good job watching us. So it feels like there's multiple like spirits present in a sense when we're doing a good job, and yeah, they're all in like this dynamic flux and leaving us and sitting with us here and there. You look like you want to say something.
So are you trying to say that we're watching Kierkegaard, watching Hegel, watching Aristotle, watching us?
Dude, it's that Spider-Man meme, you know, where they're like looking at each other, and ultimately it's just a giant circle jerk fuckfest of nothingness. But yeah, that is what I'm saying. And then, yeah, I would say the most recurring theme of the episodes hitherto has definitely been either the dealings of death, the dealings of paradox, or the dealings of preconditions. But what really ties all of that together has been identity, and you summarized that really well. We've been thinking of identity, interestingly, in a way that I, again, would have predicted, which is kind of like the golden mean of detachment and attachment, right? Vairagya in Sanskrit. Is there a difference between this healthy detachment where you can discard or relinquish your garnishments or like your ornaments? Can you throw them away at will of your own volition when the time is nigh? What are the states that give rise to that? Is it possible to give the stoicism devils their due through ataraxia? You know, is that different to equanimity? These are all like open-ended questions, but what is the state that gives rise to the person who can deal with his own condition? So that's very Goethean as well. And then we also, just one thing that you might have missed in the recap is just the subtle acknowledgement of Aristotle's scared optimism. He feels like metaphysics is possible, which is a daring belief. So yeah, he's got a humility about him. He's got an optimism about him. He's got a pessimism definitely about him. Pride as well about, you know, we talked about the relay race and passing the baton on, and he has a lot of pride about being a forerunner or a preeminent runner in that overall grand race. And he's not wrong. He is right at the top. But yeah, so it's like a mix of pride, but also humility, knowing his place in the cycle of the intergenerational discourse that is philosophy. Yeah, those would be my musings on your musings.
Yeah, not to muse on your musings. It's metaphysics is incipient, meaning beginning to develop, because it is a swirling loop of self and world. Like when we get into Aristotelian substance, when we crack that open, we find that the English translations of it have obfuscated the truth that was there in the Greek. And that's a perennial problem for philosophers that have to be translated. But I think in the case of Aristotle, it's particularly harsh on his philosophy. And so when we get to a thing like Aristotelian substance, we find that there is actually a lot more self-constitution in that substance. And even when we put that in contact with Hegel, we get a notion like substance is subject. So there's a very much a non-dual psychic energy, something that's beyond good and evil, something more at the level of the will that is at play. And I think that's why it is always so beginning. It's only just before us because it involves us. And so when we become involved in it, we start to revolve and evolve in the nature of what we're doing.
Nice, man. Very nice. Yeah, that's one thing we forgot to cover is the basement of philosophy doesn't have the image of the subject object distinction. We kind of deduced relatively quickly last episode that image itself is a non-starter and takes us not very far. And we said that Hegel wasn't the first, but he did a good job of fleshing that out.
Yeah, cool. Well, where would you like to go, man? I feel like we've done maybe the shortest recap of recent times, and we can actually get into some of the content now. That's how it seems to me.
Yeah, no, I don't have any musings squared or cubed on your ones, though. I do, but I won't say them for the sake of viewership. Yeah, so we'll get into the plan is to get into either one or two more of the puzzles of the 15 that have been laid out, at least in my rendition in the book. So last time we went over logic versus substance, again, on screen if you haven't seen it. But yeah, which one of the puzzles stood out to you as you were going through the readings throughout the week? Is there one that you want to use maybe just as a Kickstarter as well as a jumping off point, and then we can kind of ruminate over that?
Yeah, sure. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo.
Yeah.
Number 5. Yeah. No, a lot of them are like centering around a really interesting tension and could definitely go deeper into more of them. But I think drawing out some of the key ones is going to be our best use of time.
Yeah.
And so puzzle 5 is one that asks the questions of universals and particulars. It's almost the question of, are there only sensible substances, to use Aristotelian language, or also suprasensible substances, meaning kind of what we see, what's observable, versus what's unobservable or something that is in the abstract and beyond just immediate sense perception that we have to, I guess, use our cognizing substance ourselves to get to. So there's a tension that puzzle 5 centers around, and it's kind of this tension of knowledge seeming to require universals to get off the ground and exist, but reality seems to be made of particulars. So it's also that question of the one and the many. And I thought it would just be a great introduction. And I think there's going to be a lot to talk about here. And so it's explicit that we know particular physical things exist. And in episode 3, we'd brought Plato into dialogue and talked about these Platonic objects that were beyond themselves. And even in episode 1, when we're talking about Pythagoreanism and how there was in some ways a good account of an order towards higher heavenly realms, but not as a good explainer of all the particulars that we see in the world. And so it is really addressing that question of, do Platonic forms and Pythagorean mathematical entities and such like also exist? And a little bit of their, I guess it's less about their relation, but more about, yeah, how much ground and reality do each of them have? Any first thoughts?
Just a very quick one. Maybe it's just a yes or no. Do you make much of the fact that he uses suprasensible and not insensible, or do you think that's just a matter of language and translation? Is it really just the same thing?
I think we can treat it as more or less the same and know that either one we choose would have been the wrong interpretation of
That's the
Aristotle.
spirit. Dejected bros by the campfire.
No, knowing that what they talk about is far removed from what it originally was. And yet, yeah. And so I think, as you laid out last time, a sort of thesis and antithesis was a pretty good way to help set this up. Thesis meaning original proposal or proposition, that could be the case, and antithesis meaning something that through the law of non-contradiction absolutely cannot be true at the same time. So you have to find a middle ground or a midway between them.
And just before you read that out very quickly, again, acknowledging Aristotle's like open ambivalence to laying the pieces out as he sees them objectively, quote unquote, and then letting the chips fall where they may, kind of. So yeah, credit to him for doing that and for leaving it, subject to endless discourse and research and interpretation in the years to come.
And there is a meta point I want to make about what Aristotle sets up in these puzzles. Like, not once, at least to the same level of self-awareness, does he ask questions of the nature of like subjectivity and objectivity that's not apprehensible deeply enough to the Greeks at their time of writing that it enters into their discourse. It's there in a pre-conscious sort of way, but there's real limitations even about these puzzles that they're setting up. So although they're setting up these great dialectical unfolding seeds that are going to grow into large oak trees for years to come, they don't plant all the seeds that we're going to need to come to a metaphysical oak tree that we can lay under.
But not holding an active, deep antipathy towards that is enough for us to later germinate those seeds ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for us to come. And I think Aristotle also knows that in his historicity, right, is to say that this isn't the be-all, end-all. Aristotle's metaphysics is like a substance relational metaphysics. I don't think he's a pure substantialist. I think there's a lot more give in that, which does lend itself to new discovery and change and process. So puzzle 5, thesis and antithesis, is really quite simple. Thesis being that the first principles must be universal, and the antithesis in its essence being the principles must be particular and individual. So I think as I have been reading through Book Beta, there has been a little bit of a niggle in trying to understand like exactly what the principles are. I think and what I've come to learn is that it's a little bit of a mix of like his 4 causes and of his categories of understanding of potentiality and actuality. It's a lot of things which we're going to unpack later on in the metaphysics. And so I think the principles here we can essentially just take as the things that we abstract from to get knowledge about something. And like when we talk and when we use language, we're abstracting about the world to communicate. And I think the principles that Aristotle's talking about are the things that we abstract to come to know being qua being. Does that sit right with you?
Yep. Continue.
I think it's now Aristotle putting, like, what we're just seeing here is that Aristotle is asking the same question again, of of his own metaphysics. So he's
Mm.
dealt with Plato in a pretty harsh way, and we've sort of seen what he comes to think of Plato's metaphysics, which was a struggle for him. It was a struggle for him to ground knowledge and certainty in something that you couldn't locate and that seemed to have these problems of infinities associated with them and kind of third man regressions just by the way that the theory in quotation marks was set up. And I think here he's now actually like having to still ask that same question and apply that to his philosophy. And so knowing that we don't get any answers here, but to add some more to the questions, like the first principles being universals, I think that's the realm of science. Science doesn't deal with the everyday instance of something happening, but it wants to generalize to the more abstract. You know, it wants to get to a mathematical equation in physics, and that be a way of explaining something. Whereas on the other side, the principles being particular would be like the position of, hey, no, like you can't find this transcendent principle that explains there's actually a real immanence that's needed here. Only truly the things that we observe here and now is what's existing. If the principles are real, they must be tied to these individual substances. And
Aristotle's forms are individuals, right? Most strikingly, for contra Plato.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the convenience of writing a book and being able to not have to write it in a linear sequence. You can finish the book and then go back and set the problems that philosophy has to absolutely solve to be a comprehensive philosophy. And I just see like Aristotle has solved these kinds of questions in a way where he does find a dialectical integration to such questions posed, but then he sets them up as, you know, oh, they're these two options that we have to go for, and by our logic that is the firmest ground of, you know, of knowledge and understanding, and makes knowledge and understanding possible. It is the very mechanism by which we can make sense, is this field of logic, and we either act on it implicitly or we can learn it and understand it and articulate it explicitly. And so he's set it up like this, but it seems a little bit sneaky, and then he'll go on to find an integration between them, but sets them up to look like it's a bit opposed and there is a real challenge to integrate them. And then as he goes, voila, he rips off the red cape and out flies the dove, and it's, you know, and it's all beholden of the magic of Aristotle.
And yeah, I share your slight confusion on what is actually meant by the word principles by him. Only kind of by way of association, I waywardly move towards what Aristotle might mean when he says principles, when saying first principles, are they universals, particulars. Based on a different puzzle that really resonated with me, I kind of picked up that by principles, he kind of means component parts or building blocks that add up together to form a whole. And he talks about, is a thing, obviously we'll get into causes and materialis and all this stuff, but is a thing the component parts of which it's made, or the higher category to which it belongs, right? As a buzz question. That can be invoked here slightly as well. Is, you know, is the field and the form of experience we are living, is the thing that we tether to that, the thing that's at the nexus and the node that birds that or begets that, the fact that we can experience, is that the reason we're experiencing that? Or is it literally like the potency of the matter in front of us that's allowing us to experience that, to perceive that? So yeah, this is a tension. Like you kind of said this earlier with the 15 puzzles, there's 3 or 4 groupings, and in each of those groupings there's 3 or 4 puzzles, and one such grouping and set of puzzles is this classic dichotomy between universals and particulars. It just kind of manifests itself in different forms. We touched on it earlier in one of the episodes, saying you said it rather elegantly. Physics is the study of different domains. Metaphysics, the one that fuses the domains together, or the cross-disciplinary study, right? It's similar to that. Like when we talk about universals and particulars, are we really just talking about ingredients versus classification? Or is there, yes, we are, but is there more to it than that?
Yeah, and it sounds like the puzzle you're referring to there is the very next one. So ones that are sort of in this cluster, and it's asking whether the fundamental elements of things are their material parts or their genera, is the term used. And genera is also like, oh, another word I have to learn. Great. And it is, but you've got it right there. You've hit the nail on the head. It's, to me, it seemed like it was just a question of like categorical identity, like the class of something. If you look at all the different material parts of a football team, like if you look at Newcastle and you break down, well, and Newcastle's a little bit of a hyper object. It's not one thing. So this is already going to be difficult. Like I could do it to a horse and like it would be easier to explicate the point, but to make it relevant and pop culturally relevant, like you said, I'm going to choose Newcastle. But so you've got lots of different parts about it. You've got players and what they're wearing and the unique boots they have, and you have their arrangement on the field and the way they've been coached. Players of different nationalities and backgrounds and styles. And is the way to understand Newcastle is it at that level of looking at all the material parts? And even you could go right down into like the physiology of players. Like all of this is relevant and meaningful for a football player. But also like to understand Newcastle, would it be better to understand the badge, the identity that Newcastle has and what it stands for culturally and in spirit? So I don't think you can, we talked about as philosophy as negation in some sense and induction, chipping away of what's not there. But I think if you chip away the meaning and significance of the badge, the identity, the genera of Newcastle as like the class of being a club, or all these players being a class of playing in a football team, I think you lose the truth of it. And if you chip away the parts, if you take off and out the material components, then you also lose something like supremely important to what Newcastle is.
But supremely important, but ultimately surely not fundamental, right? Because the elephant in the room, again, I like addressing it, but in this case, perhaps the marine vessel is the ship of Theseus, right?
Yep. So, and then look at this. If a player's transferred out, Isak left last year. He was transferred to Liverpool and he went for 130 million. Massive deal. One of our key players. Newcastle lives on. That ship is still sailing, admittedly in the bottom half of the Prem, but it's still afloat. And I think that's the point you're making, right? You change these smaller composite parts and you still have the total identity of Newcastle.
But people would disagree with that, right? People would say, like, once Pirlo left AC Milan, it was never the same. Like, the core was lost.
Yeah, if you didn't have Alan Shearer or Kevin Keegan, would you still have Newcastle to the same extent?
But what I'm saying is, do we owe something to the purists here who say that there is something to be said about that intangible factor that is truly lost in spirit when a component material part is lost, because the matter carries the spirit? So what if,
exactly.
Like, what if 10 of the 11 left? Yeah.
In a, like, playing football myself, in a season, there's some games where you do play 10 subs of the 11, right? You just like the keeper's still in there or the centre back, but everyone else is different. It's still the club at the end of the day, but yeah, you can almost tell like, we weren't really there. That the spectators would say, that's not exactly who we are.
This is crazy. Like, I never thought I would disagree with this and fall on that side of the spectrum, but something about the way you said Newcastle lives on annoyed me, And I don't even know why. It's so surprising. Like Newcastle does not live on if Isak leaves. And I don't care or watch soccer, but I assume he's
No, it
like a proper
what?
famous player, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, Isak's just been like a
No, 'cause, like Newcastle
a rising
fundamentally
star.
is he's a striker, right? The expensive guy.
Yep.
Swedish. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So like if with him half the fan base leaves because that is congenial with or tangential to the player and his fan base, right? Surely that means that like Newcastle is the fans, the purists would say. I'm just sticking up for them. If half the fan base leaves because one of the component parts leaves, and that those are a hand in hand package, then Newcastle doesn't live on, right?
Yeah, but yours is predicated on what ifs, and the reality is Isak left and Newcastle lives on.
No, that just
Like,
depends on how you define
definitely.
Newcastle.
Right. And I mean, yes, but yeah, identity is all about how we define something. I think what, like, and to your point as well, if Alan Shearer didn't come up and was, the greatest striker in England for a time, there would be a certain essence of what it is to be a Newcastle. Like, that might not be an A tier club. It might not have the thunderous support that it has. It might be a little bit less than what it is today. And so that is like the real tangible particulars of something having a large impact on the genera or the identity of something. So I haven't come down either side of this position because I think there's a positionality which is, yeah, binds these two together in a emanation down and emergence up metaphysics. I think there's a dialectic between what is below and what is above that is in direct correspondence and directly informs the other. And I think this is not just true of like sports clubs or horses, it's also true of the structure of grammar and language itself. And when we look into theories of meaning later on, we're going to see that this is a principle that exists maybe ontologically. John Vervaeke would make the point that this is the very structure of intelligibility and of how we come to understand things does have this emanation down and emergence up. That is the nature of intelligibility. That is the nature of how we comprehend and see things. And Vervaeke would go as far as say, he would go past Kant and say that's not just a feature of the mind, which means that as we extend our perception into the world, that is all we see intrinsically because of a feature of the mind. He would say that it's also ontologically the case and that we are participating in the true structure of reality when we have that experience.
Yes, no, it's a dynamic co-creation. We're not saying you can only understand triangle because you hold steadfastly the conceptual structure, the conceptual structures of shape, right? Like that's not all he's saying, but that's not what he's not saying as well. It's that and then some.
And there was a few points that came to me when reading and thinking and pondering on puzzle 5 and 6 here. And I think like there's a bit of an Aristotelian revival that's actually happening, and Alexander Bard and Graham Harmon might be able to be classed.
What are these names?
It,
You're naming dinosaurs here. Come on.
I mean, Alexander Bard's still writing a book, apparently.
Good God.
Graham Harmon's a very relevant ontologist today. He is actually one of the leading voices in ontology. So there's a lot of merit to what he's doing, and what he is doing is showing how object-oriented ontology is that fusion of Aristotelianism and Heidegger, essentially, and phenomenology, which has been a very generative area of philosophy in the last 150 years. And I think it's through this kind of dialectic that Aristotle gives us, like first setting up as two juxtapositions and then kind of integrating them later in his philosophy, that Graham Harman is able to explicate and put through some of the recent challenges, and also using what we know through subjectivity and the qualities of perception and perception as relationship and situatedness of our lives. Like, I think Aristotle really radically puts the forms in the material things themselves and shows that how through the actuality of what something is and the potential that it has to be, you have this inseparability of its identity and its material parts. Like, they are one and the same. And through philosophers like Graham Harman, you get that explicated more, and it's showing how that Aristotelian picture of reality is really relevant and can push us to new frontiers today, new fruitful areas of philosophy, which also withstand the linguistic critique which a lot of Platonism falls to.
We've spoken in the past about how Aristotle, like Kant, is conducting his own grand synthesis of sorts, and part of the satisfaction he wants when he sets up these juxtapositions is to be able to hammer down and come down with something. And it's almost like at the end of this set of puzzles, 4, 5, 6, he kind of, like, he later will talk about the causes and say, like, while matter is a principle, so is form. So, like, my answer is both. And it's not as straightforward as saying, oh, it's universals or it's particulars, and so saying either one of those is incomplete. It's more about neither alone is sufficient, and actually choosing one actively invalidates the other. Like, that's how immanent the form is in the particular. Where my mind goes, though, in general, is like, what do we mean when we say empiricism? And maybe this is a new subtopic altogether, but then, because one of the other puzzles soon after this is, are numbers fundamental, right? And we've spoken about Pythagoras before. Like, when we talk about particulars, is the number one a particular? Do I have to be how does an entity have to relate to my 5 senses such that it's real, if at all? So yeah,
there was something that you'd just come to then, how in essence choosing invalidates and determines the other. Like, in choosing each option here and determining a metaphysical picture is simultaneously, like, to choose one side and to say, look, the Newcastle is just about the spirit, or to say Newcastle is only about the players and the spirit comes from that. To choose either of those would invalidate the other by making that choice, but it also determines the other.
yes.
And so you have this oppositional determination, and it's also that choosing, not just in a sense of, you say Newcastle is the spirit of the team, and thereby that just gives a definition to the other class where Newcastle is in the players themselves, but it actually, like, determinately defines and gives actuality to the other side of it. And I think that's something that Hegel points out, and something that a lot of philosophers are interested in today. It's that when we seek to go down one path of a false dichotomy, we can't help but actually bring the other side into reality in an incontrovertible way.
You've opposed the dialectic, you fall into the dialectic, is a bit of
Yes.
what I'm hearing there. And it's I don't have much to add to that, aside from just how offensively Hegelian everything secretly starts to smell very quickly. To semi-quote Nietzsche, but yeah, not much else to add there. But when we talk about the healthily susceptible subject, we are talking about proclivities and propensities for paradox all the time. And so another way of reframing that is just healthily holding tension. So making a choice is necessary. Invalidating the other is a serious sin, and crime in the game of philosophy, but also it's like a die if you do, die if you don't situation. So yeah,
I think that's perfectly where we are, and I think that is what we get to when we realize that we're deepening paradox and we are finding deeper contrasts to the world and to what it is that's happening in this, if you want to be reductionistic, language game that we're playing.
And what we still haven't answered is the core problem laid out at the introduction, which is the problem of production and generation, right? Aristotle is trying to answer pre-Socratics or the atomists as well in particular, who were, in Aristotle's view, incomplete in their account of the nature of reality when they say that, reality is such and such, but then he says, but what about duration? What about movement, change, things coming into being, out of being? We're still circling around again like vultures around the idea of realities. Like, we were talking about universals and particulars, and if we bring in numbers, then Plato would call that an intermediate reality because it's intradependent, not independent or dependent. But like, is this all just fluff? Like, where's the actual answer to? Because yes, it's a crime to invalidate either or because of the inextricability of emanation and emergence, but that's only useful because like the bidirectionality should lead us somewhere. It should give us, it should move us. There should be there has to be some sort of a generation, for lack of a better word, or a progression. And it feels like we're getting caught up in weightage or like some sort of false meta game when we worry about questions like this. And I'm just reminded again of the same inkling that keeps rising in me, which is, what is the type of subject, what is the type of being that sets up a juxtaposition like this, attempts to answer it, and why this question and why not the millions of other questions? So yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but like, is there something? I guess it just kills me that halfway through every discussion, I kind of think, what is the fucking point of this specific question?
I think that means that we're doing metaphysics justice. We are doing justice internally and externally.
Universals immediately detach us. Like that's just part and parcel of a universal, right? We need the replicability. Knowledge is only that which can be taught. Only that which is universalizable and not immediately solely particularized can be taught. There is value in being able to teach something and pass it on, but it detaches us from life itself. Like, it's a conundrum, right? What the hell are you meant to do about that?
And I think it only detaches us from life insofar as we were attached to life. Like
nice, yeah.
I hear you though, like also where is the practicality in what we're talking about? And I think as philosophers, we to some degree need to leave practicality at the door, go on a voyage, and then come back and realize what it is that we found. And it's not always immediately clear when we do that, especially when we go on, voyages like this. And I think, some philosophers would just go from the point of nihilism and say there is no activity to what we're doing apart from the art itself, and that is the practice of philosophy. It is as an art for itself. I think that philosophy does lend itself to like a more broader and deeper way of life and understanding, and I think all of that is there, and I think we're exemplifying all of that and are in relation to the depth and the virtue of philosophy and what it's giving us.
People feel ungrounded by a lot of the postmodernist critique of entities being, this age-old quip about is knowledge created or discovered. People feel really unnerved and disconcerted when the leanings and affiliations move and the conversations in the field move towards the idea that knowledge or entities as we see them are actually inventions and creations. They're not discovered. We're not traipsing through this holy land, expanding our conceptions and perceptions, and moving towards this horizon, moving from the known to the known unknown to the unknown unknown to the unknown, what was once unknowable, now known. We're not doing this grand movement towards anything. People feel uncomfortable about that. Some people don't. And I would say the healthy conscience doesn't feel uncomfortable about that. But what is interesting and slight respite for those that are worried that the ground of reality is entirely relative, to put it just very simplistically, contemporary mathematics has undergone a bit of a revival in terms of how they view Plato's forms, right? We talked about recent studies coming out, but in general, numbers, like to bring in the forms and Pythagoras again, numbers are more likely to be seen as real entities. Like, yes, they're intermediate realities, but they're also real entities in their intermediary-ness, if that makes sense. Yeah, I'm not sure about specifics, but I have read and skimmed a few studies that have spoken about how these numbers that we use as abstractions and then we, for lack of a better word, objectify and then replicate, are in fact discovered. Like, they're non-empirical. So we were talking about the outer bounds of empiricism. Yes, you can't see the number 3, but just the fact that something is non-empirical doesn't mean that it's not objective. So that actually acts as quite a bit of respite, right? For people that, we talked about dismissing the two worlds theory, but for people that find refuge in another world, in the hinterwelt, right? Like, numbers is a serious hinterwelt. It's a real back channel in which you can live and grow. Like, you can entirely dissociate. You can forego your identity and step into a realm, right, in which you're a floating dust particle, but it's kind of pleasurable. And a lot of people that are fucking wearing lab coats and doing science and mathematics all day are doing exactly that. They're escaping. There's a lot of escapism in science, right? That's just stating the mainstream obvious. But yeah, it's just intriguing to see the kind of topsy-turvy nature of our understanding of the forms as we've gone through decades and centuries recently.
Yeah, it's like finding the big other in mathematics.
Yeah.
It's like having your identity justified to you through what you're doing, and that mathematics giving you your identity. Again, it's on the question of identity, which is, again, a little bit uncanny in all the ways that it's coming up. I think identity is coming up in so many ways for us here and being brought into question. One, like in its historicity, it's relevant, but two, in the how the world is understandable. The understandability does necessarily, like, it's one of the poles of emanation and emergence. Identity is the thing that, as Jonathan Paget would say, comes from the higher or the heavenly spheres, is naming something, and thereby is the essence that's gathered together that we can then deal with and talk about, and that will sustain. Is the same way that a child, when they're 5, grows into an adult at 55, and they have the same name, they have the same identity in some sense. It's an identity that has moved with them and is some sense above them, because if it was spread out in their atomic self, all the atoms have gone and changed in your body by the time you're that age. So there'd be nothing left of you, but your identity remains. So it comes up and it is so significant here because it is one of the critical parts of metaphysics and of intelligibility itself. I think to just keep riffing a little bit, to find some practicality out of what we have just been talking about, when you look at some of the issues that, as you said, in perhaps an unhealthy conscience really struggles with, I think there's some fruit that we can find in it, and even in what we have been talking about, and what we landed on through discussing Newcastle and the relationship between the universal and the particular. If we also think about some of the key subjects which in almost pop philosophy are spoken about, or in the untrained inquiry into life's deepest questions, you arrive at, it's almost like, as you said, knowledge, do we create it or discover it? Mathematics, do we create it or discover it? Will, is it free or unfree? Do we have free will? God, real or unreal? And like the world, is it spiritual or material? At the heart of so many of these is an unresolved contradiction, and you cannot resolve it by choosing one of the options, because as we have discussed, you are invalidating and determining the other of those options. And so putting it in those categories to begin with is preventing you from getting to a resolution, and you stay within a dichotomous discourse. And I'm not saying that that's not all. I'm not saying that being in that dichotomy is just ephemeral and you don't get to anywhere substantive. I think you can, but I think that the deep transformation comes when you do reconcile with more of that other side, when you do make good relations from yourself to the whole of that picture. Then you start to get that archetypal balance, and you start to be able to see both sides, and you start to be able to be a dialectical self. And I think that is truer to the nature of who we are. And so that is an understanding, and giving you that cognitive flexibility is one of the benefits of doing philosophy, right? It gives you a way to think through
the Aristotle, the philosopher of fittedness. All of yoga, in the etymological sense of the word, is about shodhana, which is refinement, which is fittedness, which is correcting the agent-arena relationship, such that the atoms and cells you spoke of that extricate or expurgate themselves from your body are the right ones, so that what persists and remains is the right one for you. And so that, once again, it's the fittedness aspect of, yes, you're locked in this reverential bidirectionality with existence itself, but it has to be your one. It has to be your version. You cannot lose the subjectivity of it. And okay, so you know what makes this even further complicated is Aristotle's writing at a time where there's no screens. Technology, we know, acts as Daniel Schmachtenberger says, as a lever on our choice making. It gives us longer arms. We know that a subset of technology is the digital, and a subset of that is simply screens. But that's not, obviously, when we say technology, we're just talking about iPhones generally, colloquially, but that's not all it is. Technology is anything that makes a man's life easier, to put it in pop words once again. So technology, and then Heidegger has much, much, much to say on this and the effects of technology on a Dasein. But I'm also wondering, we're doing philosophy post Baudrillard too. Like, how do you get to the true underlying nature, the core, the thing that persists across change element of something, when the thing, even in theory, isn't possible because the thing itself is a simulacra of what it once was? And you think of Verbal Kint in The Usual Suspects saying the devil's greatest trick is convincing the world that he doesn't exist. If there's one thing that's devilish and Luciferian in hyper reality, it's us thinking that it's not hyper real, and that it is possible to get to core essence and nature, and like these fundamental topics that we constantly circle around. So yeah, I mean, I have some thoughts about the last 50 years and we talked about the intrusion of the real, the intrusion of the technological and simulation theory. Do you have anything at all to add in that space, or do you want to continue in the vein we've been moving, or anything at all to add to that?
Seems like he's also philosophizing about identity in the postmodern age and like the age of media.
Yeah, similar to Aristotle's worry and I arguably critique about anything that interrupts our contact with the concrete, we should be wary of. And if it becomes the case, that the concrete is literally unintelligible, it's not even worth worrying because it's game over. Like that's how cynical Baudrillard can be, is when reality itself is replaced by models and representation, the impossibility of metaphysics goes stratospheric in terms of its intrusion into the self, right? So where are we left? So a term that circles in the last 100 years, Vervaeke uses a lot as well, as hermeneutics of suspicion. Hermeneutics of suspicion doesn't go far enough, right? Because he talks about how I'm suspicious that behind every veneer is the actual reality that it's not disclosing to me. Behind every this, there is a that. And only because there is a that can I be skeptical of the this, because I know that somewhere there's a more fundamental reality. What if that's insufficient? Like, what if we need a new hermeneutics altogether?
But what's the deeper behind that, behind the hermeneutics of suspicion? Why doesn't that go far enough? It goes into like a very Gnostic picture, and contrasting to this is the hermeneutics of beauty, which is the deeper realities that I am learning about and seeing are the true ones and are shining forth in a way which is ultimately constituted by a ground of intelligibility, and that is layered in beauty. So I guess my question is, in what line do we need to go deeper? And when I say that as well, I do have a riff on your initial question that we'll circle back to, but just to stay with this for a while.
Quickly answer that, and then you do your riff. The reason why the hermeneutics of suspicion doesn't go far enough is because we're literally beyond mere distortion now. So at the end of Plato's Republic, you might remember he speaks about art and the 3 layers of representation, and how each layer is one layer more removed and distorted from reality itself. But what if that kernel and that nugget at the bottom of reality is itself a sign? What if we've already undergone, as he speaks about in Simulacra and Simulation, the symbolic extermination of the core? And not even what if, like that is what's happened according to him, right? The classic example people often give is you ask a 5-year-old child to draw a princess, what's he going to draw? Cinderella, Rapunzel, one of these Disney princesses. But the Disney princess is already a representation of the Victorian princesses from 200 years ago. And the only understanding and image we have of Victorian princesses is the portraits that the sketch artist made of them. So it's not even them. It's like a sketch of them sitting down. And then it's like, how many layers are we going to, like, now at the fundamental basis of our children's schema, a princess is what they see in a Disney film. Like, this is just such a basic example, but how many schemas are we starting not even at 0, or not even at ideal, comma, ideal, optimal, comma, optimal.
Yeah. I get you. I would just say that, there's a leveled hermeneutics of suspicion there, but it is still ultimately grounding out in something that is a facade and something that is unobtainable behind it, and that you are doomed to be endlessly chasing your tail and not getting through to the real. So it seems like, ultimately we are just complexifying a hermeneutics of suspicion in that way, and that does have a qualitatively different nature than to just, reality doesn't want to disclose itself and I'm left not knowing the true reality. I think it's that, but in a double-barreled way, right? There's 2 bullets in the chamber in some sense, but the same gun.
No, and to pay credit to what you're saying, we can't be that removed from reality because we experience things like piloerection, right? Like, we're still in our bodies, we're still corporeal beings. Like, what the hell is that about? The fact that we can see a mesmerizing painting, and if you're oriented somewhat sanely and correctly, you can just be blown away. So like there's a literal tethering and coupling between man and, however, albeit mediated technological reality. There's still some sort of coupling that affects our neurology and our physiology. So it's not like we're just nodes in that brain vat jar thing. Like, we might be that, but at least we still have sensation traversing up and down. So things aren't that bad as well,
Yeah, and to go back to your question of, when we're talking about realness and technology, like, what is that infusion leading to in some way?
I think
And
my core question, if you want to riff on it, would just be what layer of distortion can we handle between thing slash entity and representation? Like, how much of a slide is permissible for us to still be able to conduct investigations?
It's interesting because even in metaphysics, you have this difficulty, and it is a little bit of a slide, like it's a bit of a slip in, like it's dangerous to be in representationalism. It's sort of been discounted and discredited in a number of ways, but a lot of people almost would say that Aristotle had a representationalist metaphysic, or people coming after him more so did, where it's something in the mind corresponds to something in the world, and that representation of it is what we are looking to verify as true. And when we do, then our picture in the mind represents the picture in the world, and we have truth. Representationalist correspondence of truth.
Yeah, that's troubling because of the correspondence part and the truth part, right? That the fact that the truth is, yeah, I mean,
On so many levels.
Yeah,
Yeah. And it assumes a Cartesian subject, object, etc.
the synthetic eye.
Yeah. And also, fun fact, that is a little bit where this notion of substance as materialism gets a little bit confusing, because Cartesian dualism, he uses that term of substance, and when he's talking about extended substance, is referring to like matter rather than spirit, which was a separate substance. But he did have these classes of like spirit and matter, and hence there is a little bit of a confusion in those terms, but far from what Aristotle was talking about.
Who uses that term, extended substance?
Descartes.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think I'm just going to riff on it because I don't have an answer. That can be something we put on the shirts. I'm going to riff on that because I don't have an answer. First merch drop coming to you soon. I'd wear it. I'd wear that shit.
So I guess the core question is just how much distortion is permissible as we're conducting investigations, / do you think it's problematic when we speak about the intrusion of, we've spoken about the intrusion of the real, but the intrusion of technology as a mediator between us and the real. So we have an entity, we have a thing. For us to understand that thing, it has to exist, you would think. But what if the thing, the way that in which it presents itself or exists is through the representation of the thing? Like, is that problematic for you? Do you even agree with that? Do you make much of simulation theory, or where's your head at with that in general? And if there's no conclusive answer, just riff, man. That's what the people want.
That's why we're here. That's why we're queer. I would say that
he said it in the 6th episode. Finally, I got him to say it. Now he's gonna get cancelled.
It's an interesting situation that we're in, right? And as you said, Heidegger's been talking about it, philosophizing today with technology. And I think maybe in the past, maybe in the moment of German idealism, it was to philosophize with the subject, and maybe the moment of the 21st century, whatever this meta-modern place will become, is philosophizing with technology and subjectivity. Like those three come in. Yeah, it is. And you can see the symptoms of this just like running far and wide in culture, how getting to the real is so hard when technology's in between us and the real. We have a great fracture in our lives that is technology, and in some ways it can afford connection to the real. When I'm using ChatGPT to learn, which is, I'm not learning a lot when I'm using ChatGPT. It is gives me about 25% of what I'm looking, of the questions I'm asking. But it is very helpful in some ways, like when I'm clarifying coding, or when I'm, working in Excel spreadsheets. Like, it does give you real information, and then okay, you have this understanding of a new function and how to use it. Like, it is affording you to learn more. And just the internet in general obviously has taught us so much and connects us with so much information, but the connecting us to the information and seeing the internet and technology as Facebook, we're going to live in a super connected world. OpenAI, we're going to know everything. Instagram is like always sharing your moments with people, and through that choice and through that positioning and through those values, we're invalidating technology as separating us or cutting us off, and we're also determining that to be the case. Like, that might be the oppositional determination of technology given to us by the techno overlords, that we are now doomed to be in this difficult arena of having to connect and find friends through technology to begin with. It's partly why the whole dating apps is hard, and why there's a little bit of taboo around if you met your partner on a dating app. I don't think that's something that can't be overcome, but it sticks around. It's a bit of a cultural stigma. So I think there's a lot of real ways in which technology is interfacing with us, and making it harder to access the real. I think that those Lacanian concepts of the real, imaginary, and symbolic are all at play here. And like how often now is technology being exploited and used so that we don't have to confront the real, so that we can live in a, we can be, as you said before, like just a dust particle, but finding some pleasure in that, because we're on this game, like we are invested in Fortnite. We're playing it incessantly, and we're doing that to avoid our own identity. We're doing that to avoid the discovery of ourselves. And there was this quote that came to me in the week as we've been discussing this and going deeper into identity, which is kind of unexpected that we've been doing that. We seek an identity so that we don't have to create one. Ooh. We look for an identity somewhere in something today, in technology, so that we don't have to create one, and we don't have to forge one out of the fire. We don't have to work with the boiling mercury atop of the cauldron. That's the painstaking task. That is the finding yourself through Jung. That is being in relation to the philosophical hourglass of identity. That is carrying your ashes, and that is too much to bear.
Wow. Very, very poetic and elegant. Yeah, that's amazing, man. I'm hearing a lot of the cultural touch points that are really popular and, pervade a lot of people's consciousnesses and consciences, including, the adage of the path of least resistance and little tools like that. There's a lot of, you started off by speaking about technology and how there's so much good that can possibly come from it if we weren't, perhaps we're doomed to chase our own tail. But there's just so much non-confrontation, avoidance, repression, and how that can just, steamroll and snowball the unhappy conscience, as it were. As you were talking, I thought a lot about, like, my question itself, like, again, the sickly question of, is it possible to access the real? Like, in a nutshell, that's what we're talking about, right? And we started this discussion, just to do a bit of a circle here, about the puzzle. But the question of the puzzle is the universals and the particulars, and the sensible and the super sensible. And how does the real factor in here? How does access to the real, comprehensibility, factor in? Is our path bottom up? Is our path top down? Do we invalidate the other when we choose one? Yes, we do. Is that a crime and a sin? Of course it is. Is it, like, irrevocable? Probably. Are you going to pay with eternal damnation? Probably. But then that goes back to that sickly question of the sickly being who wants knowledge at all costs. Spinoza has this great quote: not to laugh or mourn or curse, but only to understand. All that the understand really is the form in which the other three become palpable to us all at once: laughing, mourning, cursing. for something, for knowledge to be possible, all these impulses like kind of congregate, present their case of how things were. It's almost like a court case. Like now you present your case, and then the judge will decree a decision. Like what we call knowledge is not as straightforward as us moving towards that which can be known. It's an internal turmoil. It's a struggle. So when I ask you a question like, is it troublesome or wearisome that we might not have the access to reality that we once thought, perhaps infiltrated negatively by technology? That's good. Like having that question, having those doubts, having those plagues is good. I'm kind of not saying anything new here, but it's overly simplistic to say that knowledge is a path from A to B and the presupposition that it is good. Right? God created the world, ... and it was good. Like that's a huge claim. Like probably the biggest claim in the corpus is the "and this is good" part. So yeah, that went nowhere, but that was just kind of what was sparked and struck in me as you were talking.
Any part of that you want to zoom in on or extract as one of the essential standout parts to you?
Yeah, only because I didn't understand it was the three words you used this with Lacan. What are the three terms he uses, and how does that pertain to what we're speaking about?
It's intuitive for me that they pertain to it, but essentially Lacan, in giving us the category of the real, has these other categories of psychology and the imaginary and the symbolic, and I couldn't yet give you the complete mapping onto what we're talking about. Intuitively, I can point us there, and maybe next time I'll come with that a bit more thought through. But the real is, yeah, as death, as love, as ethics, as these realities that break through abstraction and the big other that we've created out of them. And a point that you made earlier about how, and that we got to, was how for many scientists or theorists, mathematics is becoming the big other, and it's justifying their whole project because it's something that, firstly, the layperson can't touch. They couldn't critique maths. They don't have the intellect for such things. But in some ways, like, yeah, it's just math. It's just the world. Like, how is it the real? Like, if it's giving you command over nature, like, yes, that qualifies it as that's pathic, that's real. But how much, like, what have we achieved from maths in the last X amount of time? Like, there is a bit of a stagnation there too. So although, like, it's a powerful discipline, it's one that we should hold in relation with these other disciplines of our life, of virtue and family and creative expression and openness to new ideas. And in what ways is the pursuit of mathematics, and I think, like, again, we have been staying with the metaphysics book here because this is one of the puzzles in book 14, and in puzzle 14, and like the true nature of maths. So we are staying there, which is good. But in what ways is the scientist doing maths equitable to the gamer playing his PC, playing COD?
Yes. Why is there a hierarchy within the virtual realities? Why is an open world game not as cool or as exalted even as doing math? Well, it probably is. Like you can make more money from it. Like genuinely, right? Like so much of our thoughts and conceptions of this are predicated on utility. We're speaking purely about 2020, the technological in the 2020s, and what reputations undergo redemption based on practicality more now than ever, probably. You just think about like the engagement and viewership that a streamer gets versus a mathematician. Like, they both, yeah, that's an interesting point. I never thought about it that way. They both are engaging in a form of escapism, but we kind of hierarchize the different virtual realities as being above and below others. Yeah, and well expounded about the real and the imaginary and the symbolic. I wasn't familiar with those terms as used by Lacan. I guess the only other little addendum I'd make is Deleuze makes the famous switch when he speaks about cybernetic societies that move us away from Foucault's societies of discipline to societies of control. And I wonder, when we speak about, I don't care about ethics and rights and responsibilities and stuff, but for those that do, when something infringes upon your free will and reduces and removes freedom of will, when you feel like you're being trapped into a corner, does that infringement reduce your capacity to ultimately seek knowledge and be in the world and grow? And is living firmly in a society of control, and last time I used the term kind of being trapped in this golden techno feudalism, does that infringe and impede upon our lived reality more than a society of discipline? The torture of the spectacle towards now the torture of the condemned, right? Like something in the old age, you would be dragged into the center of the king's court, beaten with a stick, quartered to death, burned alive. If you're a witch and you're a woman with a sex drive, she has to die, right? And like it's done. Whereas right now, it's like this endless plague of just now add this, now add that. It's the gig economy, right? It's everything's a monthly subscription. Nothing has a beginning and an end. And that's how removed we are from the real. For something to be real, it has to end. That's the core of everything we've spoken about. Identity is identity because one day it submerges and sublates itself into unidentity, the field from which it arose, arguably, in the first place. So this hellish landscape that people feel they're inhabiting and indwells in them is justified, is what I'm trying to say. So buy my course for $50 a month.
Yeah, no, it's true. And even at work, one of the cultural currents that we've been looking at is ownership, and how what do we own today? It's all subscription based. It's all temporary. We get access to a greater catalog of music, movies, podcasts, and everything like never before, but we own none of it. It is all just subscription based and slowly extracting from us.
So linked, right? But ownership, identity, access to the real, and how it pertains to knowledge, and how knowledge is the umbrella of universals and particulars. I swear to the viewers, we have not strayed from what we were supposed to talk about. Like this all is related and does tie in.
Yeah. So buy Luca's monthly Patreon to his YouTube channel, and you can be freed from this endless turmoil of subscription-based platforms.
Well, on a more serious note, quickly, if we are looking to end, I'll just plug something. We are starting a community, about 15 people, for people that are interested in sharing and exchanging their human capital, intellectual and artistic resources amongst one another. So this will be partially in person based on where you are, and partially virtual. So if you are interested in sharing ideas, mainly to do with philosophy and technology and how they fuse with one another, and the kind of like a transhumanist, techno-futurist, optimist project, and if those terms are of affinity to you, then reach out to me for sure, and we'll work something out. None of it's paid. It's just a community group if you'd like to be a part of. We'll start off with a big Discord and see how we go from there.
I think there is a strong calling for me to end this on something of the soul and inspire some hope back into where we are in this conversation and in this societal picture. I think that there is a deep joy that is to be rescued from our position. And although we have done a job at showing a lot of the pitfalls and watchouts and criticisms in some sense of culture today, I think there is always a hope. And I can share this first through a story, in just of analysis of a common movie, right? In The Dark Knight Rises and Batman, he's imprisoned in a deep pit. He's found himself in a place with scoundrels and culprits, and even some like half decent people in there too. Like it's more just like an upside down picture of society. And he's been told that there's only one person to escape before him, and it's his adversary. And they did it by climbing this ledge and jumping to catch hold of a outcrop, like a plank of wood, and like only just being able to get it, but then climbing out. And for Batman's story, it's to have freedom and to save the city, to save Gotham. It's simultaneous. And so how does he go about escaping from this deep pit that his adversary has been able to do? Like, what is of him to now escape? And he first makes the attempts, and he's practicing, and he has a rope tied to himself and tied around the ledge so that if he misses, which he does, that he doesn't die, and that he kind of smacks into the wall, takes some damage, but can pick himself up and go again. And he's like a meter off each time he tries, and he's almost giving up. And he talks to one of the people with a bit of decency in this pit, and they say, look, your adversary that escaped, they didn't tie the rope. You don't have faith. And Batman is, and Bruce, is it Bruce Wayne or Bruce Banner? Bruce Wayne, he eventually gathers himself to go up without the rope and make that leap. It's to make the same leap of faith, to rescue yourself and to save the city, and it can't be done with the safety net. And so he makes the leap, and without the rope, he actually, down to his physiology, is calling for a lot more and is destined for a lot more, because he doesn't have a backdrop of safety. He has a backdrop of the void. He's ground. His identity is about to bottom out. It's not going to ground out, and he smacks against the side of the wall with a rope attached to the ledge. His identity bottoms out in this case. He falls to his death if he misses. And so it's because he is then inspired by this deep faith. And when he makes the leap, he jumps much harder, he pushes much further, and he catches on, and that is how he works his way out of the pit. It's through taking a leap of faith. And I think this is where Kierkegaard and his notion of faith can be brought in here, that faith carries you dialectically between what you know and what you don't know. And for Kierkegaard, he thought that faith was something higher than knowledge. He thought that philosophy often tries to pierce through faith, and science tries to pierce through faith and attain certainty. But for Kierkegaard, faith was more the resting place of philosophy, and it was superior to knowledge, and it was the aim for Kierkegaard. And I think like this is elucidated really well in some different videos and in Kierkegaard himself. The dialectic of faith is very relatable, as someone that has been raised in Christian faith and constantly having that question of, is X real? Is God real? Holy Spirit? And it always takes you to really question what you believe in so fervently, and it's really hard. It's a real struggle to question something so fundamental. But faith also takes you to the other side, where you can wonder about the absolute and the divine, and you can believe and entrust in God. But it's also a little bit destabilizing, because there could be a new article you read or podcast you listen to, and this was some of my experience growing up, where I was listening to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and all of a sudden, just by his confidence and certainty and clarity by which he speaks, destabilizes my conceptions of God and of beliefs at that deep level. That's that. And new atheism is just a way of instilling more to the conversation on one lens, but ultimately there's like stronger and deeper and more existential critiques that can be laid to God than new atheism. And so faith, you're often pulled into these different polarities, and back again, and you come back. And I think some people are in that challenge a little bit and then find their way out, and will take one of these certain positions, take one of these options, and neglect staying on the dialectic of faith. But faith isn't certain belief about something. Like, faith is the doubt of something, and faith is the doubt of something certain and the certainty of something doubtful. Like, both of those is the flight of faith. And this is now just a more philosophical point regarding Kierkegaard, that means of inflection that faith can have to take you between those is grounded on the absurd. That's why absurdism is such a deep and profound part of Kierkegaard and such a deep and profound part of life, because the thing greater than knowledge, the faith, which is the resting place of philosophy and of our lives, entails this like tipping scale. Like, if you have a thermometer and there's water in it, and you just tip it side to side, and everything in the middle is like chaotic and moving around, as the air bubble gets, flows through each side. It is just like that gravitational flip. It's the hourglass flip that is the absurd.
You've peaked, bro. You're not going to get higher than this. Just first rule of showmanship, leave the audience wanting more. So I think you should just leave, man. It's not going to get better than that.
See you guys. Yeah.
So yeah, guys, successful Sermon on the Mount. But yeah, no, that was sick, man. Successful proselytization. You've converted me. Like this is
Join my church.
This is rampant for me in my heart for the last week as well. I've felt all of that very voraciously throughout the week, and also as you were speaking, a lot of it was re-sparked. Yeah, the injunction here is remove the guardrails if you want to actually live. Remove the guardrails. And the key word is the imperative at the start. Remove. You have to be the one to, not to let the flood wipe you out. There's a voluntary exposure, right? First rule of cognitive behavior therapy, voluntary, choosing the unchoice of faith or something like that. A lot of my, the other term that came to mind is just Israel, right? Like, we who wrestle with God. That's the point. People, I guess, contentious term, contentious country, whatever, but probably the most aptly named country in the world for the times that we live in. And I couldn't agree more with you, man. The new atheism mind virus that infiltrates adolescence particularly it's just a hump that you have to get over. I think nothing brings you closer to Christ than Nietzsche on one shoulder and Sam Harris on the other, probably. So keep those two in lock and step. And yeah, if you really want to affirm faith in something, yeah, again, remove the guardrails. I felt a lot of anger in the last week at my own fear. All my anger has been directly linked to or based off of the fact that I feel scared, and I'm annoyed that I'm not comfortable in my fear. Let me just read out a poem. The only battleground. O great overstayer of welcomes, departure is nigh, you untimely one. O my cancerous limb, I wish your people domicide. Evacuate this instant, O unruly indweller. Zero strikes clock. Deftly you steal through labyrinthine canals, veiled, orderly, tamed. Clock strikes zero. Gleefully grinning, brimming now, reducing to debris all front runners. Land ho! Rejoice, O indivisible ones, for I have slain that magnificent naysayer in utero. So that magnificent naysayer that I slay in utero before it catches a hold of me and becomes this cancerous limb that spreads and permeates is fear. So it's not about not having fear, it's about living with it. Like, so much of the manosphere is not wrong when they talk about overcoming fear and run straight, headstrong, head first into pain. That's great, but why don't you just learn to live with it? Like, what's the correct optimal amount of dose? Because you can't remove pain from your life, nor should you want to. It's so strange to me that, loosely speaking, the red pillars and the black pillars are so adamant about overcoming pain. It's puzzling, it's baffling. And the white pillars are like, no, we need to change the social environment such that you never have to face that pain and never have to feel that pain. Equally stupid. One, actually, that's not true. One more than the other. But yeah, both very stupid. So yeah, pain is the other elephant in the room that's always there when we're talking about identity, access to the real, universals, particulars, knowledge, all this stuff. Pain might be the grand unifier of everything. Yeah, I have a bit of a riff on pain, but that might open new doors, so I'll leave it at that. But yeah, I share your sentiment, what you're saying about the new atheist currents. I think ultimately that sickly search for certainty that I keep harkening on about is nothing more than just a cheap sense of security that people are after. Like, at least I know this, at least I can rest my laurels here now. I don't have to be involved in this swirling game of order and chaos because I know this, finding a tentative epistemic bedrock such that I can operate. And all of knowledge, knowledge is just a proxy to make the unknown familiar, not to make the unknown known. That's not even possible, perhaps. And that, intriguingly, is what ruins many a man, right? In his despair and self-contempt, he realizes that I can't actually make the unknown known. I can only make the unfamiliar familiar. And if that doesn't suffice for you, then yeah, ...
Become a Platonist. I like what you're saying in that, in your riff on pain, and I think to once again demonstrate how this knowledge is applicable and is practical. Not that that's the point of it, but that is just one of the helpful offsprings of it. Yeah, a way to think about it would be not to overcome pain to get rid of it, or to remove it from the environment, or to alchemize it such that you don't experience it as pain at all, but you experience it as masochism or something, or sadism. But it's to overcome pain such that you can live with it, such that pain has a real place in your life that is painful, that doesn't go away, but you're sensitized to it to be able to be close with it and to be vulnerable to it, and to integrate that as part of you.
Existentially too, right? Because we know that evolutionarily pain has a purpose, but that's again that dry scientific need for lucidity and obvious endpoints. Like, we know you're supposed to recalibrate. We know all this stuff, but yeah, I think you are definitely onto something when you speak about the need to choose the right pain, sit with it, overcome it such that you can coexist in a sense.
It's been such a pleasure this evening. This has been one of my favorite episodes. I will sleep with a healthy conscience tonight, and I look forward to doing this again in a week's time.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for those of you that made it this far. Again, like, subscribe, do your thing, join my monthly Patreon. There isn't one, but you can make one if you want. And if you are interested about the mid-sized group we're creating to do with philosophy, technology, and how artistic man places himself in between that, and what is the path for art, where does artistic ambition find its fruition through philosophy and technology, and how they weave with one another, definitely reach out and we'll set something up. And yep, thank you again for watching. It's been an absolute pleasure. We'll be back next time and go through another one of the puzzles in book beta. Today I feel like we did more than one. We definitely jumped around a lot and covered one full grouping out of the 3 or 4, I would say, which feels like a really nice landing spot. So we'll be back again. We're here, we're alive, we're everything. So please join us next time as well. Thank you.
And I would say, as a final ad, and maybe this makes the cut, maybe this doesn't, we have one more puzzle to get to, and then we have to address one of the major fault lines in philosophy. We have metaphysics on one side, and you have the logical positivists on the other. So let's explore this fault line and whether the linguistic critique dismantles philosophy and turns philosophy to be therapeutic and rescue us from the trauma of metaphysics, or whether metaphysics can continue and is able to block the critique from Wittgenstein and other logical positivists. So join us next week for the answers.